Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Learning and Development Podcast, sponsored by Infopro Learning. As always, I'm your host, Nolan Hout. Joining me on the podcast today is a very special guest, Cori Power, who's the Education Director of BDO. With over 20 years of experience in HR and in learning and development, Cori's really done it all, and today we're going to be talking about all things onboarding, from strategies to measurement and everything in between. Without further ado, let's meet our guest. Hey, Cori, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Nolan. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks. And we're going to dig into the topic today, which we want to talk about employee onboarding with modern learning strategies, which is very apt. Now, lots of companies are going through huge peaks of employees, offboarding, onboarding. The latter is more fun than the former, obviously, but it creates unique challenges for us, and especially with kind of this remote hybrid world that we live in. So really happy. We'll dig into that. But before we do, Cori, I want to start by learning a little bit more about you, your journey to where you are, obviously at BDO, managing a lot of the training programs for the Alliance firm, but you didn't start there. I'd love to learn about your origin story, if you would.
Yeah. If we go way back, so I kind of fell into the realm of HR accidentally. So I was in college. I was interested in psychology, took a IO psych class, and was like, "Ooh, this is cool." It kind of combines things that I really like, and so ended up in the realm of HR. And for about 18 months of my life, it was like trial by fire. I worked for a call center. It was a collection agency, and I was in HR there, and it was a lot. It was like 900 employees. And it was, I think 1 month we had about 90 terminations. And so it was like 10% of our workforce, right? And I was like, I don't want to be here. It's great. It was just, it's that cycle.
It's that environment. It's the nature of
it. So I ended up going to interview at a CPA firm, and here's my funny story about that is I didn't know what a CPA was. I had to Google it before I actually went to the interview. So I was like, okay, I know now that it's a certified public accountant. So
that's the first test. That was my first question is, do you know what a CPA is?
And I ended up, I worked at that firm for about 15 years, actually. And so I was their first HR person. And when I started there, I had about 70 employees. And by the time that I left, we were closer to like 500 employees. And so had huge amount of growth. My team went from, just me to there were 5 of us when I left. And so I sat in that HR seat for a very long time, eventually moved over to the training and development role because that was really where I felt a lot of passion. But in that HR realm, there were so many onboarding changes that we did with our new hires. And so this was one of those topics I was like, ooh, this is a good one I like to speak on because it's such an impactful piece of when you're bringing somebody on board and their retention and their engagement. It's just kind of like that initial branding that they get of your firm. So
and I'm going to immediately run off script because I have a different question that came to mind, and you're so uniquely positioned to solve it, Cori. I was thinking, well, it's connected to onboarding, I swear. With how a lot of organizations are looking at their talent these days, skills is becoming kind of the number one framework. And it's interesting, you must have seen it when you were the hat, which a lot of people, and I'm sure a lot of people listening to this are in, a smaller organization where they're doing onboarding as well as, finding benefits.
It's a soup to nuts.
And everything. So you're having to do a little bit of everything. Obviously, and what I found is that those organizations kind of grow depending on what the person's focus is, right? If they're really into the benefits and payroll stuff, kind of they get really good at that, and then talent kind of takes a backseat. But long story short, and you're in a large organization, obviously at the BDO, a very large organization actually. There's a more fragmented. I say fragmented, not that they are, but HR has its silo or whatever, its shop, the organization, and then learning has its organization. And sometimes those are seen as disconnected, not one. Even if they are connected, it almost seems as a dotted line, which is really important when it comes to onboarding, because if we're not recruiting based off of let's assume we're a skills-based organization and we've defined a good salesperson has these skills. If that's not evidenced in the recruitment process and we're not finding people with those skills, and then if in the onboarding stage, we're not tying to those skills that we thought were so important and reinforcing those, there's a big disconnect. So I guess my first question, before we get into what actually should live in that onboarding, it's how do you partner, when you don't have the benefit of owning it all, which is a blessing and a curse, how do you partner with maybe a department that you don't, you're not reporting into and they're not reporting into you, to say, okay, when we look at this onboarding journey, it's not just about what happens day one. It actually starts day -10 when they get recruited. Can you talk a little bit about how you make sure that that's all connected?
Yeah, I think you have to be super collaborative. And so if you have that type of environment, you can get all of those people in the same room together and talk really, high level about what's the plan. So you've got those recruiters in the room, you've got those learning and development folks in the room, you've got HR in the room, and you probably have some subject matter experts
Yeah.
in the room
Yeah.
so they can talk through what skills and things like that you need. And so I think that, I don't know specifically, but I believe that that's kind of how BDO runs things, because it's very much like everyone knows everything, and then they're making sure that it all dovetails really, really nicely together. But you definitely need all of those pieces playing together, because like you said, otherwise it's kind of jerky and herky and it doesn't feel connected. And when you get those people in, they might not be the right people, or they might not be getting the right training based on what they have for experience and skills. And so it is super important. But I think that strategy and that process has to be built collaboratively. You can't just do it one and then one and then one.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's speak a little bit more about this, since we're talking about the structure already. What is that structure? So we want to build an onboarding journey. We want to build a better onboarding experience. Where do we start?
I think you kind of nailed it, which was like at -10. When you're going through the recruiting process, as someone who is like sitting in that candidate seat, you're already kind of deciding whether you want to be part of that organization based on the experience that you're having. And so that's already kind of onboarding. And then once you get hired, then you really kind of, it starts from right away. So like, what does that offer letter look like? What are the communications coming out, that pre-communication of like, what's the essential information I need to know for day one? What are the expectations I need for day one? And then when you come on board, it's really that like comprehensive piece of like, here is information about the company, the policies, the benefits, the key systems that you need to know. And then it kind of goes into more of that role specific training. When I kind of think about that onboarding experience, I'm an analogy person, and I like the idea of like kind of building a house. Like you build the foundation first, and you've got a really good foundation of that knowledge of the organization and what you're looking for. And then slowly but surely you start to build the structure. And then, by the end of it, you're kind of like putting in the shower heads and things like that. Who do I need to know and touch base with for this or that? So it's really like you have to start super early on. And for that candidate, they're experiencing that right away. It's like walking into a store, for the first time, and you're kind of seeing everything and judging based on that. And then slowly you start to kind of take in the details, but that's kind of how I think of it. Did I answer the question?
And one of the things that I was fascinated about, when I watch, right now I'm rewatching Breaking Bad on Netflix. Great show for anybody that missed it. It's on Netflix. Go watch it. Anyways, after I'm done with that, it's going to say, now you might want to watch, and I'm sure it's going to be some other show like that. Does it know?
Saul, or
Yeah, Better Call Saul. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's going to say, hey, you like this, go watch Better Call Saul. But it's not going to say, you've liked that, why don't you go watch Love Island UK? Or Love is Blind, I guess, is on Netflix. I do watch Love Island, and it's great, by the way. Terrible, but great, but don't judge me on that. Anyways, so it shows it for me. Now, in onboarding, it's kind of a similar thing you mentioned on a roll, right? Is you kind of want to create that experience where maybe the onboarding at BDO is kind of a generic show. Something that's everybody could like the Great British Baking Show or something like that has a mass appeal. But then you kind of need to start leveling them into, now let's draw them down the path that they should be interested in based off of what their role is, based off of the skills required for that role. And I feel that makes L&D one of the hardest jobs in the world, because you're not, it's not like marketing where you can create an ad specific to a male who's 35 years old who needs shaving cream, right? You can target it very specific. You got to create something for that male, for the female, for the old person, for the young person, whatever it should be. How do you kind of personalize that onboarding to some extent where they feel, okay, now I'm getting a part of sales or finance? And so how do you get that knowledge? Because you're not in sales, you're not in all these departments. How do you bring that knowledge in to create a little bit more of a personalized experience?
It's such a good question. I'm going to approach it from kind of a two-stand approach. So I think if you have the ability, like we're going to talk about that digital onboarding piece of it, if you have the ability to kind of utilize that digital aspect of it, do that. Cause I think
Right.
that's going to be really where you can get into more of that personalized learning. Like it's kind of using the AI technology of, oh, you watch this, maybe you should watch this.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
kind of like that, right? Like you're building a learning plan for them based on, so this is what you're onboarding for, this is your experience level, and you can kind of slot in those courses or those onboarding videos that you want them to watch based on that. If you don't have that ability, because not every firm has the ability to have those tools, right? And so I think that if you don't have those abilities, you really do have to start super basic and then kind of modify from there. So if you've got a highly experienced person coming in versus a brand new person out of college, that onboarding experience look very different. So
Right.
you're going to have like your basics. Here's about the firm. Here's about
Yeah.
our benefits. Here's key systems. And then you'll probably likely pass them on to their team first, or like quicker than you would maybe for like a new hire. So you can kind of pass them on to their manager or their mentor or whoever's going to be taking over that and say like, they've got the basics, they're ready to run, versus a new hire where you're like, okay, they've got the basics. Now we kind of need to build on that and help them understand softwares and how we do, say they're a tax person, like how we do 1040s, how we do business returns. What does this look like?
The fun stuff.
Yeah, yeah. And then they might go to their team a little bit later once they have a little more of the foundation. But like, I think you do have to take that time to really structure it. And if you have the ability to use that digital, that AI knowledge, use it because it's going to save so much time.
Yeah, what we used to develop for a lot of clients is like an onboarding survey that shows questions
Ooh.
dependent on the role. So we worked with them essentially to create, this wasn't even using AI. I mean, it kind of is, but not like, it's not so complicated, I guess. But we said, okay, well, let's develop kind of a question bank based off of the role and how it will judge how familiar they are with the company and the actual job that we want them to do.
Right.
Depending on how they answer, we're going to show, there's 10 steps of this onboarding journey. We'll either start them at step 1 or we'll start them at step 9. So they were kind of able to select, and the benefit is they knew, like, these, they're not anybody you hire, they're smart enough to know, okay, I take a quiz, I see questions afterwards. So it did give them that ability to feel it's true that they were in control of their learning, because it gave them that option to say, tell us what you know, and then we'll help you along the way. Because I think that's the other problem is, nobody wants to be told or taught to. They want to learn. They don't want to be taught. And so that's really important. One of the things you mentioned on digital, which I really wanted to talk about, and you've seen this arc for sure. I'm assuming it's changed quite a bit. I've talked to people, and I actually just onboarded a gentleman 2 weeks ago who I won't meet for another 3 weeks.
Okay.
If I'm lucky, and sometimes I've onboarded people and I've met them 4 months later.
Right.
How do you blend that? Digital is good, it's great, you can do all these cool things like, these surveys and stuff, but how do you, I don't know, when you walk into a company, you kind of want to have a personal connect. How do you but there's a cost to that, and all this, that, and the other. How do you kind of strike the balance between, let's make it digital, let's make it autonomous, so that our onboarding cost, at that call center where you're onboarding 30 people a month, your onboarding cost is huge. So that becomes so how do you keep the cost down, but keep that engagement high and make them really feel not just onboarded, but welcome?
Yeah. So I actually I work remotely. None of my team is anywhere near me. So I'm in Iowa, and I think the nearest person to me is in Minneapolis, right? And so everything that I did from day one has all been digital. It's been, so I onboarded, I met with an HR person briefly. I watched an orientation, started kind of my training process. But I think the big thing for me for the personalized aspect of it was everything was ready for me. Like they sent me a laptop and it had a nice little note in it. And and I met with my manager right away. So it was like, it wasn't just the HR side of things. Like I was getting already, into BDO culture. And then not just that, but the Alliance team culture. I was like already meeting those people and I had calls lined up on my calendar, which was really nice. Like you are like, oh, they're thinking about me, how I should be included in this team before I even started. And so I think you can do that from a cultural standpoint. Like one of the things, and it's silly, right? But merch is kind of nice. So like a little thing, I got like a little BDO laptop carrier and a backpack and just like, and so you're kind of like, okay, I'm here. I can, you definitely can merge those two. I've also, it depends on where you're located, but I think, and how you want to create your experience. But I've also seen firms that have done like a DoorDash. What's your favorite beverage that you like to start your morning with? And they'll DoorDash your favorite coffee.
Idea that
or like, let's have lunch together, and they'll DoorDash your lunch, and you can sit down with your team or your manager. So it still feels very one-on-one in a way, but even if you're not in the same location or you're not walking into a building on your day one.
Yeah, I really like that. Like DoorDash, send us your drink order, whatever it is. Even because even if you can't personalize their learning path or meet them in person, there is something, I mean, there is very something unique to my drink order, right? And,
Right.
are you a black coffee person or a 18 shots of caramel mocha double whip person? And honestly, probably tells you a lot. The manager now probably knows more about them than they got in the resume. The person that requests booze probably needs to get a little bit of a flag of, maybe, or put him in the sales department.
My daughter's a barista, and she tells me all about the people that come in and what they order. And she's like, I can learn a lot about a person by their order.
Yeah, I bet. I have to give a small, I promise there's no benefit. I don't even own stock in their company, but Starbucks has shifted a lot of their policies to really promote more in-person coffee experience. Absolute love it. I don't know why I'm even plugging it. If you haven't been to Starbucks recently, it's kind of a cool environment now. You can get your drink in a mug, unlimited refills. It's a great thing.
Cool.
But so I was thinking about the DoorDash thing and some of the merch you mentioned. And I see, I think this is where some people have missed the boat when it comes to building out their onboarding programs. Everybody kind of moved to digital as a way to kind of say like, oh, well, let's like save cost. Really what I think it should have been is, we have $1,000 to onboard an employee, or whatever, 200, whatever it is. You have $100. I have $100 to onboard an employee. How do we want to spend that money? Okay, well, $20 has to go towards our admin fee of spinning up this, and I'm sure, I know it's a lot more money, so just bear with me. But then if but then maybe $80 is going to the actual time, or 80%, let's say, is spent on just walking this person through the HR stuff. Right. They're gonna like listen because they're on the call, but they don't necessarily are going to do anything about it, right? Do you need to walk somebody through ADP portal, or can you just tell them, hey, this is where it is? Because more than likely, they're only going to need it come tax season, right? Like I'm applying for a loan or I have to do my taxes. I don't need to spend my onboarding time learning about ADP. So I like to look at it as take that same budget. Don't look at digitizing or automating your onboarding experience as a way to cut costs. You can,
right?
But think of how could I take that same money and make it more engaging? And I know that's a big point for you, Cori, is like, what do you get from having a more engaged employee? So what is that investment? You mentioned, it made you feel good, but aside from feeling good, what are some of the metrics that you track that say this is the value of a good onboarding experience? This is how we know we've done our job well.
Right. Well, I think retention is definitely one of them. I mean, look at the end of the year, how many of your new hires have stayed.
Absolutely.
That's going to be a key. You can look at if you do any sort of engagement surveys, you can look at that engagement. You can look at, if you cut it out too, you can see how your new hires are, like if your new hires are engaged, like you can truly like look at those cuts and see. I think that's really big. And then also from a team perspective, so like what teams are killing it? What are the ones that have high retention? What are the ones that have high engagement? And going to those teams and like, what are you doing? Why do you have such a great team? So I think those are big ones. Others, you could not just like look at the engagement and the retention, but also like production, what's coming out of those teams. So, and how quickly are you able to get somebody onboarded? So
the competency, very important metric.
And I think a great onboarding process will really have that. Like it not only obviously helps with like feeling part of the culture, like I mentioned, but you can, you have a better understanding of your role. You have a better understanding of the position and your expectations. And it's kind of a confidence boost, right? Like you feel like you know more. And so you can start to contribute to conversations more and maybe help the team become more innovative, because every time
Yeah.
you bring on a new person, they have a new perspective, and you can have that the more diversity of thought. So it's faster time to productivity. Like they're actually getting things done, and they have that knowledge and the skills to like really truly make an impact, whether it's on the team or client or however.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, for me, what I've found with a lot of people I've had on the podcast and just some of the projects that we've worked on, I've always found these projects go the best when you've thought about this before you make that investment, because
Right.
so much of it is also unique to what you're trying to accomplish, right? Not everybody has the same onboarding. Your measurement of onboarding your CEO is going to be a heck of a lot different than a customer service rep who you plan to have for 18 months and move up. And so there's so much that you need to stop and say, what really are we going to measure? And one piece of advice that I got from a client, USA Today, we were building out their onboarding program. And he's like, people care about the numbers when you put dollar signs in front of them. So saying my, what is the word? Attrition in 90 days usually is a kind of a key stat, right? Of like what happens first 90 days, the next 100, 180, then 360, right? And we usually look at those for attrition or retention, depending on what you want to look at. But if you start putting cost to those numbers, and unfortunately, I mean, the negative, the actual cost, not cost saving, but hey, anytime we lose an employee at this band, it costs us this amount of money to replace them.
Right.
And this is how much money we lost last year attributed to a poor onboarding experience. Now, nobody wants to say that because the people, a lot of times the person designing the onboarding experience is the one coming to the table, but the reality is it's very rarely just that. It's like not the synchronous onboarding. It's the culture of the team. It's the we did this first little bit, but when they went and met the team gave them a completely different pitch. We were showing them the Netflix, we were showing them Great British Bake Off, and we were showing them a lot of these fluff articles. The second they went to the team, they were watching Sons of Anarchy. What I mean? Like, and so if you start putting dollars behind these numbers, either on the plus side or the negative side, like, listen, last year our attrition was at 30%. Now, cost us $300,000. This year it cost us $100,000. We saved BDO $200,000 by investing $50K in this, or by spending an extra $2,000 to send people backpacks with BDO written. And I think that's really where I see that a lot of people see the most success is not just having the percentages, growth and gains and pluses and minuses, but then boiling it down to $1 and saying, like, the company spent this money. Like, don't come to me about my $100,000 revamp of my onboarding program. We spent that in 5 people finding less call center reps. Yeah, so I see that as a big win. So at BDO, I from what I understand is a large part of what you've been doing is building out these onboarding programs and employee integration into those. What are some of those lessons learned? There's other people out here that are listening. We've already talked about a lot of things, right? Syncing with HR and the other people, upstream and downstream. We've talked about connecting it back to, revenue or metrics of some sort, to talking about leveraging digital to kind of see people. What are some of those other like lessons learned? If you were to say, hey, I'm starting this onboarding program, this is what we have found was a big value to us at BDO that might apply to others.
Sure. And I can't really speak to BDO specifically. I don't sit on that team. I can speak to the alliance though. So when anytime we have a new alliance firm on board, they go through an onboarding process, right? It's very similar. And I would say the biggest lesson I've learned, and it's no different for a new employee versus a new firm coming on, is just the sheer amount of knowledge that person is trying to consume in a small amount of time. So it's just like, how can you utilize almost like a drip campaign so they're not feeling overwhelmed and they're actually able to utilize all the knowledge that you're sharing with them. And so I think the big thing for me is like, let's space it out a little bit. So what do they need to know immediately? And then what do they need to know maybe a little bit less urgently? And you just kind of go down the line. And so I think that thinking, instead of like, let's throw everything at you all at once, it's like, how can we kind of space it out so you can really consume it and remember it, is the biggest lesson.
I just onboarded a person, and in the first week, we flew their counterpart, who happens to live in India, to Boston to meet. And so they sat down next to each other and met for that whole week. And created all kinds of documents of this is what I should do, blah, 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 blah. Well, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, actually, I get an email from the person saying, hey, I'm completely out of the loop here. I don't know what's going on this very specific project. We haven't even talked about it. Nobody seems to have let me know what's going on. I paused and, well, that's interesting because I could have sworn. I pull up the onboarding document and I pull it up and I see here's when we talked about it. And she goes, oh my gosh, I completely forgot we even had that conversation. So yeah, it is so real. Like sometimes say it again and say it again is so important, and don't try to pack everything in right away and know that they're going to forget a lot of it anyway. So give them the information, get them meeting their team, get them meeting their boss, get them working, and let them kind of look at that as a journey versus my onboarding last 2 weeks. Once it's done, close the book, somebody else's problem.
Right.
Totally valid. One thing I want to touch on, Cori, and I think it's really important for a lot of people, because you onboard and you help onboard the alliance members of BDO, which is kind of a partner network, if you would. So BDO, right, has their own corporation, their internal staff, right? But then BDO is made up of a bunch of what's called alliance firms. So these are, partners, Infopro Learning happens to be one of them, lots of others. So you're onboarding a unique set of individual that isn't necessarily like an internal employee, but you've done it before, right? And you've done both, because obviously when you were at this other CPA firm, you were onboarding people into the company that were employees. If you wouldn't mind, can you talk a little bit about the differences of those two? I think that's really fascinating.
Yeah. I think the big thing is I can almost speak more to the similarities and the differences.
Yeah, well, then let's start with those. Yeah.
I think for me, the biggest key was kind of creating that relationship in a way with them and understanding like you are a resource for them. They can come to you and ask questions, and it's no different whether you are a client or whether you're an employee, because as an HR person, your clients are your internal team members, right? And so it's like, hey, you can come to us with any questions. We're going to go through all of this. You're going to have a lot of questions after this because you're going to remember about half of what I'm going to say. And I always just tell them up front, like, I'm going to go through a lot. You're going to want to come back to me in 3 weeks and be like, I think you maybe mentioned this. Can you kind of go back to that? And so I always just let them know, like, we're here. Please don't ever feel like you should have remembered this and you're uncomfortable coming and asking questions. And so it's very similar. I mentioned kind of spacing things out. I think that's really important as well for that. And I think maybe the big difference is like when you onboard a new team member, you then kind of pass them off unless they're on your own team. Like as an HR person, you're like, I'm going to give you everything you need to know from my perspective. And then you just pass them off. And we don't do that. It's like we get to keep those relationships, which is so fun. And you can kind of like, you really start to build them. And it's always really cool too, when you have a new firm starting and then you start to see them really start to utilize the resources and see the value in the alliance. And I think the same could be very true of a new hire. They start to use and see things.
As you were talking about it, I was thinking, oh, that's the big difference is when you onboard, us as an example, we can come to you at any point and we feel like we should come to you if we have any questions. But when you in the L&D team or in the HR team, when you're onboarding a colleague, the questions they have are going to go to their reporting manager. So that's where I feel like it's again, everything is a double-sided sword here. The value, in your case, Cori, where you sit today, is you get to own the experience. You don't have to rely on somebody else to not drop the ball, right? You can deliver that unified experience. But when you're onboarding employees, you have an end date almost, even if that's a year long, even whatever it is, there's almost a finite time in which you get to, okay, now fly, like spread your wings and fly. And it can be as nice as that, or as it can be, now you're somebody else's problem, depending on the type of person you are. But I do wonder if there's something to that of like, how would you, and would it be better? Would it be a good thing or would it be a bad thing to keep you connected to like, hey, and now that I've onboarded you through HR, I'm here. I'm your person. Whether you need me now, You need me 2 years from, you have a problem with the manager, you have a problem with your boss, you have a problem with the client.
Yeah.
I'm your person to come to. Anytime you reach out, you talk to me, I will get you
Right.
sorted. Don't worry about it. I wonder what the impact, I mean, obviously that would be a very labor intensive.
I think that's the idea of an HR business partner within an
Correct.
organization. So if we have, like, we've got 12,000 employees in so many departments, but we have
Yeah.
one person in HR that we go to. Like, I know if I need to go to HR, I'm going to call Rachel, and she's
Yeah.
going to be my
Yeah.
person. And
Yeah.
that to me makes a huge amount of difference, because she knows the alliance, she knows our team, she knows kind of where we're coming from, the context of things.
Yeah.
So that makes a huge difference if you're a larger organization.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you're smaller, I think you kind of have the benefit of, when I, when I was sitting in that seat, we had 120 employees. I knew everybody.
Yeah.
I knew their kids. I knew,
Totally.
so it's a little different that way. But if you do have that larger organization, it makes a big difference.
And one of the pushbacks I've heard with some of this stuff is, how do we have the people, the bandwidth, the time, whatever. For those, I would really encourage, we talked about this at the beginning. If you leverage technology the right, most people have the same question. They really
Yes.
do. It is the 80-20 rule. If you can find a way through a bot, AI, FAQs,
Yes.
video, if your HR business partner, if you're like, oh, well, why have one HR business partner for 1,000 people? How do they even do their job? Well, 80% is going to be the same. If you can find a way to take those requests and get them answered, via that, it allows for you to have that human experience. Tying it back to the onboarding, the same kind of principle applies. What can we automate that should be automated so that we can deliver a personalized experience that the employee needs when they need it? There is a time when they need it. They don't need me to walk them through ADP because I don't want them to anyways. So really interesting and fascinating to talk on that.
Sorry, quickly on that.
Yeah.
I just was going to say, that's one thing that I think BDO has done a really good job of. So when I started, they had like a bot, and his name was Bart, and it was very kind of fun. Like, you could ask Bart questions related to your new hire experience, and they've now shifted a little bit over to, it's more like a chat GPT, but we have our own. It's chat BDO, it's internal, but it's called Horizon, and it's a persona that answers things specific to policies and procedures. So it does definitely take the onus off that HR business partner.
And that's phenomenal. I love solutions like that. I think it's that human plus AI world. It's not the other. It's the synergy between the two. That's really what people are seeing the value.
It's an and.
Well, thanks, Cori. Yeah, it's an and, not an or. Well, thank you so much, Cori. We've covered a lot today. I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with everybody. Cori Power, Cori, then Power. She's on LinkedIn. Please do. She loves to help out others, and follow her there. Obviously, where to get our information as well. Any final remarks, Cori, before we sign off for the day?
I think the only words of wisdom I have to say is, make sure that you keep onboarding your employees. Like, don't just stop at that end mark. Keep onboarding them. Keep making sure that they know that you continue to care about them. So we kind of go back to, like, we would say this within our old organization, like, you date your new hires all the way up through the process of recruiting, and then you kind of like stop dating them, and then they're like, and so you're kind of letting them down. I know dating is not the right word.
And ghosted. Yeah, I'm not ghosting them.
They know you care about them, their value.
I love that. I'm telling you that, DoorDash, I think, it's not that hard. Put an alert in the system once a quarter, have somebody message them, what's your drink order? Drinks are on BDO today. We know, we'll DoorDash something. What a cool thing to do. Well, wonderful advice, Cori. Thank you so much. We'll have to do this again sometime soon. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you, Nolan.